I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
Thursday edition of the Chris Johnston Show, here for your eyeballs and ear holes. We do these shows obviously on Zoom. We're both sitting on chairs. My back is in considerable pain. So if you see me at any point, CJ, wincing or doing one of these, like, it's not because your takes are bad. It's because I have a hot bag on the right side of my back, just trying to make sure I don't break anything.
Not as young as you once were. You must have overdone it somewhere.
I think so. Yeah, this is also karma for all the times I've made jokes about people being older than me. That's what it absolutely has to be. I learned my valuable lesson.
Life humbles you. How's a way of doing that?
Yeah, I guess so. A lot of COVID-19 news we're going to have to get through. What's actually kind of interesting is when we did the episode on Tuesday, we did touch off on the Olympics and the concerns with COVID-19. But we recorded probably about 2 hours from the big avalanche of news that just kind of kept coming in, more like a tidal wave, actually, wave after wave of Calgary Flames stuff. The Carolina Hurricanes with a bunch of players going to protocol and their game that night against the Minnesota Wild being postponed. The Flames eventually, they were supposed to have their games postponed through Thursday. I believe they've been postponed through Saturdays. They have 16 of their players in protocol and other staffers as well. The players on the Predators as well in COVID protocol as well. Matthew
Carolina.
Barzal. Yeah.
Boston, Florida.
Everywhere, in almost everywhere, essentially. There have been players who have gotten out of COVID protocol, like 2 in Montreal. But it's at a point now where there was just so much news over the last 2 days with this. Before we get into more details about some of the players in COVID protocol, I'm just curious from your perspective, obviously as a reporter, what was it like just seeing all of that stuff just kind of come at you one after the other?
For me, it was the closest that we were since March 2020. Frankly. And obviously we live in a different world now and a lot of people have been vaccinated and even boosted. We've lived with this for some time. So it's not new in that sense, but it was the first time it felt kind of beyond anyone's control or like it was sliding into the abyss. And so, yeah, it's been difficult and the league is really dealing with a lot of different issues at once. What stands out too, Julian, is every day it changes. You're saying what we discussed on Tuesday. It was the world's changed since Tuesday and it's only Thursday morning, it's a very fluid kind of situation. And, at this point in time, the league isn't considering a pause. I don't think there's really been any meaningful talk about that because let's call it as it is. If let's say they do pause, they say over all the games are done through Christmas. We'll pick back up on the 27th just to pick a random day. Well, what happens if you come back to 27th and you still have this happening? Do you have to pause again? And so, I think that they're, obviously they're putting in the enhanced protocols now into January, really going back to kind of a lockdown bubble type mode, which they played last season under. And they're just going to try to hammer through, but it's difficult because, any of these players that go on the COVID protocol list, they're there for 10 days. And that's assuming they don't have symptoms that linger or anything like that. And the good news, they say, for example, out of Calgary is despite, I think they have 27 total members of the organization, including off-ice staff and coaches and what have you, in addition to those players in protocol. Well, it sounds like almost none of them have symptoms. So, it's not, we're dealing with a lot of asymptomatic cases here, but nevertheless, it's a real challenging time for the league. And as I say, it kind of brought me back a little bit to where we started with this pandemic and just you're refreshing your feed and just getting slapped around with all the different news that's coming in.
Yeah, one of the news bits that I didn't even mention over the last 2 days is the fact that in Ontario now, for games at the Scotiabank Arena, they've slashed attendance in half now capacity at half in anticipation of what's going on with the Omicron variant, at 50% capacity for Leafs and Raptors games going forward here. Yeah, you're right. Since Tuesday, the world it keeps changing at every possible moment, just dealing with COVID-19 and dealing with all the changes that are coming in. It's enough to make my head spin, and it's kind of hard to just kind of get a wrap on all of it. You're right. The comparison to March 2020 is pretty good. Yeah.
We can't make any declarations, right? I can say that at this point, yeah, they're not talking about pausing the season, but maybe by the time we record Monday, that the conversation happens. Like, I just think it's literally that fluid. If anything, the NHL, there's lots of things that can be criticized for, and we've done that over our time on the show. But if you look at the pandemic as a whole, they've actually been pretty good at being flexible and finding a way to do the bubble playoffs in 2020, and creating the North Division for the 2021 season. I do think that they've been reasonably nimble in terms of doing their business and changing the way they usually do things. And so, we could see taxi squads added. I know there's been at least some low-level conversation about that possibility, because this does create, not only are the teams losing these players, and there's a lot of very good players on the COVID list. We've had a number of teams playing short skaters because of their cap situation and the way that's all accounted for right now under the cap. And so perhaps that's something that could be instituted a change. And again, one or two phone calls today, it could happen. So, it's a really heavy time. I don't think there's any way around that. And look, it's just a reflection of what's going on around the continent and Europe too. I mean, the number of cases are going crazy. And so this isn't an NHL problem. The NHL just reflects back the problem that society itself is facing with this issue.
Yeah, it's caused a lot of, I understand for a lot of, I'm sure for us and for a lot of people listening to the show, it's definitely causing a bit of anxiety. And I don't know, my optimism in all this is that we have vaccines, there are boosters available. We've been through worse. At this time last year, we weren't even vaccinated. We didn't even know if an NHL season was going to happen. You remember that? Like around this time, like last year, in 2010, we did not know when or if there was going to be an NHL season in 2021. Like I'm a bit more optimistic. I'm a bit more I'm cautious and a bit anxious, but I feel way more optimistic about what's going on now. And also just seeing that the players who have been in COVID protocol, they don't appear to be overly sick. Like that's how I'm kind of feeling about it.
Right. Well, that's what you have. That reflects a league that's fully vaccinated, save for one player that plays in Detroit. So, the vaccines obviously and the boosters, because a lot of the US based players are boosted as well. They don't necessarily prevent the outbreaks, but, we've certainly seen far fewer cases of players being really in a tough spot with this. We don't know about the long-term effects. Like I'm not just trying to slough this off and be like, oh, it's nothing. These guys aren't getting that sick, because, I don't know what it's going to produce long-term, but yeah, I've now known a number of people that got COVID, even just in my personal life, which I actually couldn't say at the start. I was lucky in the early months of this. Anecdotally, it didn't touch me, but in the last few weeks and months, I've had friends and what have you, contract the virus. So, I hate to say it, but maybe everyone's going to get it at some point. I think we're all waiting for normal to come back, and maybe there isn't going to be normal, right? I mean, maybe this is kind of the normal for the foreseeable future. I mean, it's just so hard to know. I mean, I can tell you when I got my second vaccine in June, I was thinking, oh, great. Now we're on the home stretch now, I'm vaccinated, everything will be good. But here we are kind of in a familiar spot. And, what that Ontario news signals to me with the Leafs and the Raptors and the Senators all going down to half capacity is maybe it's a step back towards lockdowns, which we had extensive lockdowns here during the pandemic. And that's difficult to put your mind around just from a mental health kind of standpoint.
Yeah. I'll just say this as someone who lives in Quebec, who not only had to deal with lockdowns, but also a curfew. Look, I do not want a curfew. A lockdown is one thing, but I do not want a curfew again. Oh my God. But anyway, I don't want to go into too much into all that stuff. Even though we still do have to discuss COVID, but I understand for a lot of people listening with COVID, it's not something that's easy to discuss and it can make you feel anxious. However, I do want to discuss, it's time for an Olympic check. We did say they were going to be happening pretty periodically. And one player who, there's a few players who've spoken out in the last few days. Erik Karlsson saying that as it stands right now, it might not look as if he'll be going to the Olympics with Team Sweden. Steven Stamkos spoke to The Athletic. Spoke to the media, but The Athletic put a story out on it just discussing the possibility of going to the Olympics. And he says he would go if given the opportunity. And obviously, if you look back at his career, the way management might have handled things in 2010, injuries, the NHL and the IIHF squabbling with each other, there have been so many opportunities for Steven Stamkos to make the Olympics, but it has not happened. So I can completely understand why he would want to still go to the Olympics if he were given that opportunity to go.
Sure. Well, let's sound it up a somewhat optimistic note here, because I know there's been a lot of pessimism. The NHLPA conducted 3 conference calls this week with players who are on long lists and under consideration for the Olympics. And it sounds like on the calls, actually, there was still quite a bit of support from players wanting to go. And obviously one of the points of having that kind of call is to get the updated information, to ask questions and to keep the conversation going. So it wasn't like they were making decisions there, but I was told that they were given pretty sort of stark news or a stark look at how it is, where essentially they said, look, if you get on a plane to China, like, we can't really help you once you get there. I mean, obviously we've made a deal to try to make this the most comfortable situation that it can be. But, if you contract COVID while in China, I mean, you're at the mercy in a sense of the Chinese authorities. And right now those authorities have told us there's a 3 to 5 week quarantine period for anyone who contracts COVID. So, it's a huge risk, frankly, for the NHLers. I'm not saying they shouldn't take that risk. I think it's an individual choice. And if you're Steven Stamkos, you might say, look, as you quite rightly highlight there, he could have potentially even been in Vancouver in 2010, although he's a young player then. But, certainly 2014, he broke his leg in the run up to Sochi. 2018, he still would have been a player that I think would have played in Pyeongchang if they went and they didn't go. And so, he might look at all that series of events and say, I'll just roll the dice and live with the consequences. You wonder what the more experienced players think. Someone like Erik Karlsson, who has experienced it and played in Sochi. I know he didn't get a chance to win a gold medal yet with Team Sweden or anything like that. So he's got some unfinished business maybe, but it's a compelling topic. It's very much ongoing. I do think what's most likely is not that they would pull out entirely, Julian. But maybe we see a fair number of players decide not to go for their own personal reasons. It's hard for me. I don't think as a group that PA is going to pull out. I mean, look, anything could happen. Even the league could bar them from going too, or say that there's just, there've been too much damage to the schedule or what have you. So it's fluid, but there was a lot of, it sounded like still players interested in going despite everything that they're facing on those calls this week. And those calls will continue. I think that the NHL and the NHLPA are going to lean on the IOC, the IIHF, anyone that can affect the rules around this and try to make a better deal where a player wouldn't be subject to that kind of quarantine period. That alone would probably change it. I mean, it's still going to be a difficult Olympics, no question. But this decision is going to go right through that January 10th opt-out deadline without penalty, and then probably even beyond for some guys. And I think we will see more players pull out like Robin Leonard did, but I think it's going to be, if not fully best on best, a version close to best on best, with some guys assuming the risk.
One guy I didn't mention among those who said something about Olympic participation is Conor McDavid, who initially said, yes, it was a little unsettling to hear of the idea that quarantine could be up to 5 weeks in China. But he stressed that, it's on him it's on players to get all the important facts and info to make an informed decision about going. I was wondering if you had any extra thoughts on Conor McDavid's media availability discussing COVID, the cases going up, and also the Olympics.
Well, Connor really wants to go. Sidney Crosby really wants to go. Austin Matthews really wants to go. I mean, some of the absolute best players, most marketable players with the most influence still want to be there. And so that actually bodes well for it happening. Like I've made this point a few times, but we wouldn't even be at the point where the NHL was committed to going if these guys didn't want to go. Like, I don't even think, going back to the summer, like, I don't think the NHLPA fully loved the deal the players made to go to the Olympics, like in terms of it being in their best interest, but overwhelmingly the desire of the top guys and players that would have a chance to play there, they want to do it. And so, even though they can't bring family members and they do risk potentially losing some money on their contracts if they get COVID and they're unavailable on the other side, all this sort of stuff. I mean, the players are willing to make that sacrifice to make it even get on the schedule. And now it seems that some of them are going to make what, again, it's a crazy time right now. I mean, I can't even imagine. At one point there was some talk about me going to the Olympics, for my employers, and that's not happening. Like it would be hard to imagine getting on a plane to China right now. And that's not a shot at China. I mean, it's just, it doesn't feel like the time to be traveling around, and the world itself is so uncertain. There's aspects of that country politically that are very uncertain. I give the players credit for having conviction, frankly. And the NHL kind of created this monster, I think, because they took NHL players there to begin with, starting in 1998. And all these young guys grew up watching their heroes play those events. And for all the flaws of the Olympic movement, all the money and greed and corruption and things that go on, there's nothing like the Olympics. I mean, it's from a sporting standpoint, it's a pinnacle. And so we're actually getting to see here how much it means to these guys. Like, this is not just words. It's not because they're looking for a break in NHL schedule. I mean, I think it really has huge meaning to them. And that's actually one of the things I take away from the fact that they hear this 3 to 5 week quarantine and they're not all en masse saying, all right, we're done.
Yeah. I don't know if there's any other last thing we want to add on COVID. The one thing I'll just say is, because of how fluid the situation is, like, I anticipate by the time we even finish recording, there will be more guys added to COVID protocol. And I don't want to make it like I get it. It's a bit wild to even just consider all of that, but that's just how fluid the situation is. Like, geez, it's just, I know I'm a bit lost out of words here, but it's just crazy just to even consider how crazy all the last 2 days have been just dealing with all of that. And it's not just the NHL who's had to deal with it too. Obviously, there's the real world, but other leagues like the NBA and the NFL have also had to deal with an uptick in COVID cases as well.
Right. And even, a media member that I know of got it while we were down in Florida.
Eric Engels. Yeah, or good.
Oh, did he just share that publicly?
Oh, no. Well, he put out he's in quarantine in Florida. Okay. Yeah. He's
I'm not trying to out anyone, but I'm just saying, I'm merely saying that it's touching every aspect of the world. Like, it really is not, it's not an NHL specific issue. I mean, it's an issue, huge issue for the NHL, but I mean, it's everywhere right now.
Yeah. And also I'll take this time to say with Eric, I know I don't know exactly when he'll be out of quarantine, but just my thoughts are with him, just because, he's in a hotel room in Florida. He put that on Twitter just to let everybody know upon that about a couple of days ago. Hope everything's okay. Hope he's able to get out just fine. And looking forward to seeing him at the Bell Center when we can do that again. I want to move on to the next topic. One of the other bigger stories that we've had to deal with in the National Hockey League this year with the matter of Kyle Beach and the Chicago Blackhawks. They reached a settlement yesterday. I'll just read out a quote from the Wirtz family. The parties are pleased to announce that today's mediation resulted in a confidential settlement between the Blackhawks and Kyle Beach. The Blackhawks hope that this resolution will bring some measure of peace and closure for Mr. Beach. Because of the fact that there aren't really any facts out there in terms of how much, I can't really ask you, hey, were you able to figure out a number? But just any thoughts on the fact that this matter has more or less come to a close here?
Well, it's a settlement, right? So it's a number that obviously Kyle Beach and his lawyers and family were comfortable with. And so you almost echo the sentiment there that was in the statement, that you just hope that this can be the beginning for him to move on from that chapter in his life. As we talked about at the time that Rick West did that interview with him, just very brave of him to put his face to it and to come forward. And, I do think from a legal standpoint, the Blackhawks probably had a case not to end up making this kind of settlement. And they did. And so, I hope that, because I did the mental exercise. I've done it with like some friends or people in the industry at the time as going on, like, what would be a fair number? Like, I couldn't even, I wouldn't know where to start. Like, is it 1 million? Is it 100 million? Like, is it somewhere in the middle? Like, I don't know. But obviously this impacted his life to a huge degree. I have to imagine it impacted his career prospects as well, and therefore his earning potential. And, they're acknowledging wrongdoing with making that kind of settlement. So, I didn't try to find out the number. I won't try to find out the number. I saw Rick West said it was between 1 million and 10 million. But, or at least someone had told him that he put on his Twitter feed. And so, yeah, I think that it's the right thing. And now, apparently they're going to enter some similar mediation and settlement talks with John Doe number 2, which was the second victim of Bradley Aldrich, who was a teenager at the time. After Aldrich's employment with the Blackhawks. And so, hopefully they go to the right place there. And it is a spot for those families and those individuals to get some closure.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for as well. We cannot forget about John Doe 2 and all of this. We know there isn't a name that we know of them right now. They have not made that public, but we cannot forget about them and their families and what they've endured at the hands of a monster in Bradley Aldrich. And yeah, I'm glad that Kyle Beach and the Blackhawks were able to come together on some sort of settlement. I just hope that, I really hope and pray we never have to hear of something like this ever again. I really hope we never have to hear anything like this again. It shook us. It shook a lot of people to our cores. And I just hope we never have to hear anything like this again.
I agree. Thing is, unfortunately, bad things are going to happen, right? I'm not saying it'll be this exact thing, but like the lesson here, I hope that every organization, the league, everyone is taking to heart is that once something bad has happened, how you react to it is important. And, that's because I don't think that, based on what I've read in the investigation, like reasonably, I don't know that there's anything the Blackhawks could have done before the incident between Kyle Beach and Brad Aldrich. Like I think, unfortunately, that was sort of going to happen. But then, the real pain, I think, came from what they didn't do afterwards. And so, it wouldn't change the fact that what happened. But yeah, we don't want to ever hear about anything bad happening. But if we're being realistic, there's, people are going to cross the line, mistakes are going to be made, bad things do happen, but it's how you deal with it. And I think that there are a lot of people working hockey now that would think twice about how to handle something that, that didn't happen back in 2010.
Yeah. And I hope that also extends to how we as media people would look to cover something like that as well. I also need to acknowledge the fact that this was a pretty heavy start to this podcast. We went in on COVID. We went in on Kyle Beach.
We're living in heavy times, man. We're just reflecting the world we're in.
We are, absolutely. But I did want to talk about a team that, at least on the ice, is not playing all that well. I know this might be a little bit of an awkward turn, but this is me just trying to segue through it. But it's a team that a lot of people on Twitter were trying to give you grief for labeling them as a pretender. And lo and behold, they've lost 6 straight. They've gotten to a point where a fan threw a jersey on the ice. They are the 4th Canadian market to do so this season, and that is the Edmonton Oilers. McDavid and Draisaitl going pointless in their last 2 games. Like when's the last time that's happened with this team? Draisaitl 2 points in his last 5. McDavid 3 points in his last 5. For so many other players, that's not a bad stat total. But for those 2 players, those guys were supposed to lead the MVP conversation. That's not good enough. The Oilers losing 6 straight. Any thoughts on that? Does that change your view of this team? Is it just a cold streak?
Well, I certainly think it's a cold streak because just the stats you highlighted there, that Draisaitl and McDavid have been bottled up a little bit. Well, we've got hundreds of games of examples where they don't get bottled up. So, I don't think that will continue to be a trend line. What I see in Edmonton is certainly the natives seem to be getting restless. I mean, I see it a lot on hockey Twitter. But my sense is the organization actually isn't in as dire a spot as sort of the market around them, I guess is the best way to put it. And so, I think that they look more objectively at, the last 4 games in particular, where they feel that they outchanced and outshot and outplayed their opponents and ended up 0-4. And so I think they're actually much calmer inside the walls than what's going on around them. But, at some point you do have to start winning. I mean, that this sort of thing can snowball, right? And, confidence is a part of the sport. But, I think that the Oilers actually appear like they'll be okay, but they got to start getting some wins here and quiet everyone down and get back into a roll. But, I don't get the sense, look, the holiday roster trade freeze is just about to kick in. But I don't get the sense, even if it wasn't, that they're about to make a bunch of panic moves or anything like that. I think they're going to bet on having 2 of the best players in the world being a good strategy and just try to fight through it. Look, they're one of the teams that's been hit by COVID. Their head coach, Dave Tippett's in protocol, a couple players. So, they're in it right now, but as they're not alone in that around the league. And so, I think that we shouldn't expect any big panic moves to happen in this moment. I don't sense that the panic has risen up to the front office the way it has in the marketplace.
But as we've mentioned on this show many a time, they're going to have to make moves in order to be a true contender, right? Like the goaltending is an issue. Ben Sherrod is out there. He's the top. They need help on defense as well. They might need some secondary scoring too. Like the Oilers are at some point are going to have to do something.
Yeah, it's conceivable to me that they had a forward, a defenseman, and a goaltender before March 21st, the trade deadline. We'll see on the goaltending piece, but they've kind of ridden this duo of Koskinen and Mike Smith the last couple of years. I mean, Smith's been injured most of the season, so a little bit of, the book's still out on him, but, just because of his age and the fact he's been injured and not getting in a rhythm, if you're going to try to win a Stanley Cup, I've thought it all along. I don't like Marc-Andre Fleury to me makes too much sense for Edmonton and for Fleury. He's in the final year of his deal and playing in Chicago. And, the Blackhawks have actually started winning games since Derek King took over as their interim coach. But, I don't see them. I mean, maybe they have it in them, but I don't see them making a charge for a playoff spot. And so, as we get closer to the deadline, I mean, there would be a cap component to that issue, to that trade that would be difficult for Edmonton. But, it makes a ton of sense on paper. And even for Fleury, who has a no move clause to waive to go to a team like Edmonton, I think they've at least sort of kicked tires or everyone involved in that situation recognizes it could be a potential fit. So we'll see if that happens. They got to beef up the blue line, and they're always going to be looking for secondary scoring, just because they've got a lot of money tied up at the top of the roster, and there's less to spend everywhere else. So I think Ken Holland will be aggressive when it comes time to in the new year, but I just don't think now's the time in response to this particular losing skid.
Can I tell you about the most ridiculous trade proposal I came across on like some hockey like fan board the other day? Do you ever like look through some of those? Do you get lost in some of those? Like I do. Man, you're better than me on that. I saw someone on, I'm not going to mention what the name of the group is. I know it's for a show in Montreal. I just wanted to point this out just because I just think it's hilarious to me. Someone thinks that someone put up on the internet Leon Draisaitl should get traded for Carey Price, and I can't stop laughing about how ridiculous it is. And they were just like, Edmonton needs a very good goalie to get to the next level, and Montreal just needs a good return for Carey Price.
Well, I have to say that person's probably a Canadiens fan. Yes. I'm going to go on a limb.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, it's the funniest thing to me that I've read all week. There's no way a trade like that even happens. But like Carey Price, if someone's willing to take on at least half of his money, I'm really curious if he gets himself to health, like what the market would be like for him if he were offered up. Yeah, I'm really curious. Like I don't know.
I mean, the contract is hard to get around.
It's it.
So it's not even a comment on Carey's play. It's just there's a lot of risk attached to bringing in a player with that much left on his deal at that kind of number that you can't really get rid of. So, I think the Canadiens will probably have to eat money on that deal. Just guessing, even as good as Carey Price is. So he's got to get back and get playing. Like maybe he's a trade deadline guy, but that feels like an offseason move to me if it's going to happen. But I do think it's at least possible now. I wouldn't have thought so as when Mark Bergevin was running the show, but when you get new leadership that, Carey doesn't have a relationship with at the top of the organization, if that leadership potentially starts angling towards a rebuild, there'll be difficult conversations with Jeff Petrie and Brendan Gallagher too. I mean, those guys just signed extensions and obviously love being Canadians and wanted to be part of a team they thought was, on the way up. And if the new management wants to go in a different direction, I'm not saying that they'll be traded necessarily, but like, I think you have to have that conversation. Do you still want to be here through that? If we turn to a younger lineup or losing or what have you. And so it's been a pretty stark about face for Montreal because the way things went so quickly off the cliff. So yeah, I think we're now in a world where Carey Price might play for another team. He's first got to get playing for the Canadiens again and show that he's come out on the other side of his knee and hip issues, and also a stint for substance abuse.
Yes, of course. Substance use. I think you said abuse.
Pardon me. Yes, use. I did say yes.
No, that's fine. We just got to make sure we get that right. One other thing I wanted to mention, funny enough, with the Oilers that I know I'm kind of jumping back here. The fact that McDavid and Draisaitl have gone so cold over the last few games, in a weird way, it kind of opens up the MVP race in a little bit. Like you know who the leading point getter is right now in the National Hockey League?
He wears number 8, and he's always been great.
That's it. That's my boy, Alexander Ovechkin. 21 goals, 46 points. And most of pretty much up until Wednesday night, he did not have Nicholas Backstrom at his disposal. And he's now come back from hip issues.
What a ridiculous season.
I know.
I know some of it's shooting percentage driven. Like, he's had some fortunate luck in terms of the goals he scored on the shots he's generated. But still, it's at his age, like, I'm not sure there's proper appreciation for how good this is. And I would say, look, you got Cale Makar there potentially in an MVP type of race. I mean, it's going to be hard for him because there's so many great players on his team. And, you know, everyone gets twisted in knots over the description of the Hart Trophies being the player judged to be the most valuable to his team. You know, Austin Matthews could sneak in too. I mean, he's quietly filling the net and, you know, looking like he's going to climb up and get in the rocket race again. And, you know, his defensive impacts have been really strong. You know, I still like the guys in Edmonton. Like, I really view this as one bad week or two that won't define their season in any stretch, but I'm with you. You know, when they're not running away with the points race, like they were, you know, 3 weeks ago, you know, it does create a different conversation about, you know, who the MVP candidates are.
Absolutely. Cale Makar, I'll mention, I don't think he gets serious Hart Trophy consideration unless he challenges for the all-time goal scoring record on defense or something. Like, he gets 40 goals. He's at 13 right now. So he'll probably reach 20, 25, but if he gets 30, 35, then you're like, oh, wait a minute.
Funny thing is 13 for a defenseman is a great season in itself.
That's true.
But I'm with you. Sorry. Yeah. You're right. He's got to, and I also think that for Austin, for him reasonably to win, because he's not going to get point totals like those other guys. He's got to score 60 goals in 75 games or whatever he's going to play. It has to be something so strong that he gets into that mix. But I guess the fact that it's no longer just a runaway where we're debating, could Draisaitl win it over McDavid or what have you? You know, there's an open door there for, I think, debate and conversation and scrutiny over who that choice would be.
Absolutely. I think I more or less ran through everything that we wanted to get through on this Thursday edition of the CJ Show.
Adam will be happy. This is closer to 30 than it's going to be an hour for a change.
I think so, yeah. We didn't even get to stick taps yet. I was going to give mine Alexander Ovechkin for leading the points race right now and just being as great as he's been. And I know, people be like, man, he's gone unfortunate with the shooting percentage, but we're talking about the greatest goal scorer of this current generation. If there's one guy who's going to get it going when it comes to his shooting percentage, it should be him. Also, I will give a stick tap to a player in another sport in Steph Curry, who's now the all-time leader in 3-pointers. He broke the record set by Ray Allen at Madison Square Garden earlier this week. It's one of the coolest things we've seen. And it's a really cool record to break, and it comes from the greatest shooter of all time. So why not give stick taps to two of the greatest athletes I have ever seen, whether in person or actually, I don't think I've seen Ovechkin play in person yet. I haven't seen Curry play. I've yet to see Ovechkin play. The one time I thought I would have, I think he got suspended for not playing in the All-Star game, and I remember being in the visitors' locker room and interviewing all these players, and he just shows up wearing a suit and just eating, I think he was eating hot dogs. He was just in a suit, just chowing down on hot dogs. Anyway.
One of the coolest things I got to do is I went to the NBA Finals game in 2016 at Golden State versus Cleveland. I was down there covering the Stanley Cup Final with San Jose and Pittsburgh. And on an off night, Elliot Friedman got us a hookup and we went up and it was pretty cool to be, it was their old arena, of course. I think it was called Oracle Arena. It was this cool old arena though. It was, I can understand why they had to replace it, but the place felt like history. And then you're there at the NBA Finals. We were walking on the court, which was wild. And you just Tom Brady's over here, this guy's there. It was a pinch me moment. And so I got to see Steph play live once. Anyway, my stick tap goes to, Elliot Friedman for the hookup for that NBA Finals experience, but also to Marie-Philippe Poulin, who scored 2 goals last night. The Canadian versus U.S. series in advance of the Beijing Olympics is going. She had the overtime winner and the goal in regulation. And I know we don't give women's hockey enough love on the pod, but the one aspect of the Olympic tournament is it does appear that the women's event's going to go on as it would, and of course it's shaping up as another Canada-U.S. battle, and the U.S. has had the better end in the big games. Obviously, won the gold in Pyeongchang, but the Canadian women have been holding their own here in the lead up, tests that they're running essentially.
Absolutely. We have to give our flowers.
She's the GOAT too. Come on.
I mean, yeah, of course. Look, we don't need to compare Marie-Philippe Poulin to anybody. She's just the GOAT on her own. If you're going to get mad about that, we'll go kick rocks. Anyway, thank you all so much for listening to the 25th ever episode of the Chris Johnston Show, a Thursday edition. Of course, we'll be back on Monday with a brand spanking new episode. Actually, I guess since the holidays are coming up, I guess we got to figure out how that's going to work leading up to Christmas, I guess. But that's something we could talk about with the boss man and Jesse and all those other people.
Yeah, we'll light up the group chat. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure that out. Get your questions in for Ask CJ on Monday and join the Discord. Subscribe to the SDPN YouTube page. Subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Google, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, we're all there. We got you covered. For CJ, I'm Julian saying so long and peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.